Good morning. My name is Brother Trent Sligh, and I am the pastor of Melrose Baptist Church. And I will be doing the devotions on the pastor's blog in the month of March. What we're going to be doing over the next 31 days is we're going to be going through the first chapter of the Gospel of Mark. And so we'll just take a little bit at a time every day, and eventually we'll work our way all the way through it. I hope that you are blessed by this, and I pray that God is glorified in it. So today we want to start with Mark chapter 1, verse 1, and it says, "The beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God." There's really three things that I want to bring out this morning. And that is that the story that Mark is presenting to us in this book is the gospel. The word gospel, as I'm sure many of you know, means good news. It is a word that is used in both the Old Testament and in Greek writings from the ancient Near East, oftentimes describing reports of victory. However, it can also be used to describe other things. So, for instance, the same word, gospel or good news, is used to describe the birth of Caesar Augustus, the first emperor of the Roman Empire. In the scriptures, particularly in the book of Isaiah, good news is the phrase that is used to describe the final saving act of God, where, for instance, Isaiah talks about the servant coming to preach good news to the poor and those who are captives. I think that is probably the best way to understand it, because Jesus himself tends to talk about his message in that way. The other thing that I think is interesting about this word is that while in other places that were contemporary with Mark, good news is often plural, in the Bible, particularly here, it's always singular. That is, it's not just some more good news among other good news, it is the good news. And so, what we have in this book is not just a chronicle of dates and stories about things that happened, but it is actually a confession of faith. It is an account of the good news that someone has come to deliver the poor, to save those who are lost. And this is something that we can take a lot of encouragement from. Now, the second thing that I want to point out to you this morning is that this gospel is about one particular person, and that person is Jesus Christ. Now, the Hebrew equivalent of Jesus, of the name Jesus, is the name Yehoshua. Now, sometimes we hear it as Yeshua. This is the Aramaic version of the Hebrew name. But regardless of whether we're saying Jesus, Yehoshua, or Yeshua, the name is very appropriate because it means God is salvation. For the one who was sent to save God's people, this is definitely an appropriate name. Now, the word Christ is more of a title as opposed to a name. Christ is our English equivalent of a Greek word which means anointed one. This, in turn, is the equivalent of the Hebrew word Messiah, which also means the same thing. The concept of an anointed one comes from the Old Testament, where it was common for the servants of God to be anointed, not only with oil as a symbol of God's presence, but also oftentimes by the very Spirit of God himself. When we get to talking about Jesus at his baptism, we'll see the Spirit come upon him and anoint him. So, over time, this concept developed into the anointed one, an ultimate anointed one. And this gospel is about the one who God has sent to bring salvation, who is the anointed one. And that's Jesus. The Jesus that we've always been told about, the Jesus we know and love and believe in and trust in. That is who we are talking about here. And we should not lose sight of that. This is not just a gospel about another good man or a gospel about some other prophet. This is the gospel of the one who has come to save us. But here's the last thing I want to point out this morning. Jesus Christ is not just another man. Because Mark tells us in the first verse of his gospel that Jesus is the Son of God. That title by itself signals to us that Jesus is divine, that he is the second person of the Trinity. Son of God is a title that Mark often uses in very specific contexts. It's one of his favorite ways of referring to Jesus. In very significant moments throughout the Gospel of Mark, Jesus will be called the Son of God. And this is just the first one. Now, sonship speaks to the idea of being like someone. Oftentimes, obviously, when we talk about someone being a son, we're talking about someone who is physically descended from that person. But this is more than that. This is the idea that they are like them. And Jesus is more like God than anyone else has ever been and ever will be, because Jesus is God himself in the flesh. And so one of the things that I would just point out in closing here is that I always find it fascinating that there are people out there who like to say that the Gospels are coy or shy about this idea that Jesus is divine. I think that is silly. The very first verse of this gospel gives Jesus the title of Son of God, a title of divinity. And as we see, as we go through this chapter, this will occur over and over again. So the Gospel of Mark is not a mystery. The gospel is not a mystery. Is Jesus the Son of God? No, he is the Son of God. The question that everyone must ask is, do we actually believe that? I hope you have a good day.